So this actually happened back in 2020, but it still eats me up to this day. Me, 27F, and my cousin, 27F, were very close all throughout growing up. We definitely had some fights throughout the years, one in 2016 being her sending inappropriate Snapchat photos to my high school/college boyfriend of her coming out of the shower, saying things that made my then boyfriend uncomfortable. I confronted her about it as non-accusatory and gentle as I could, and she got defensive and weird and hurtful, but ultimately we made up, and I moved on because that boyfriend sucked anyway. Admittedly, I think that was the first thing that caused more distance between us. But that's not even the situation I'm actually writing in about. My cousin and I have always had very different political views, but we just always avoided the topic of politics around each other when we were younger, because we had a couple fights that never ended well. My other reasoning was because I just simply didn't feel like I knew enough about it when I was a kid to make it feel worth fighting about with family members. Back in 2020, my cousin had gotten engaged and asked me to be one of her bridesmaids. I was so excited for her and happy she asked me because, like I said, we had grown a little more distant, I felt, over the years, and I was just touched she still considered me that important to her life. This was during the Trump administration and the pandemic, when there was obviously a lot of division, still is, in the US, particularly regarding BLM, COVID, and abortion rights. I have never been the type to overly post on Instagram about political views and issues just because I personally don't feel like that is where much of an actual difference can be made. However, during those very divisive times, I'd post an occasional infographic that I felt weren't rooted in too much emotion and just were simply facts that everyone should know. Now, this is just how I felt, but it seemed that every time I would post something on my story about an issue, the few times I did, that my cousin would almost immediately post something that I considered to be a hateful opposition to my views. She is completely within her right to do that. I just felt myself starting to grow resentment towards her over this, which I didn't want, especially since I was about to be in her wedding, so not giving it too much thought, I unfollowed her. Which I admit was petty, but in my defense, I had no idea you could simply mute people on Instagram at this time, and truly I didn't think she would notice because she had like over 1,500 people following her. I don't know how soon after I unfollowed her that she texted me, but it was definitely within a few days. She texted me asking if I had unfollowed her on Instagram because of her stories and political views. I composed a very long and thought-out text explaining my feelings, starting it with "I love her very much," but seeing the stuff she would post would bring me a lot of sadness and not great feelings. So yes, I did unfollow to avoid seeing that stuff and to protect our relationship and my feelings about her. If y'all want to see screenshots of the texts, I will post them because I still feel like my response was kind and fair. She responded basically saying how she doesn't like my political views either, but deals with it and didn't realize how I felt about her. I said I loved her, but I guess she just focused on how the post made me feel upset. She said she can't believe I can't separate my feelings about politics and my family, and that it would be best to come to her wedding as a guest. She knew I had bought the bridesmaid dress and shoes and everything. That's not that big a deal. I was able to sell them, just still hurt. I felt like she was overreacting about an unfollow and was being hypocritical in saying I couldn't separate those feelings, yet here, she was doing the same thing. I just didn't respond and left it at that. Her wedding invites were then sent out, and guess who didn't even get an invitation as a wedding guest? That's right, me. However, she did have the audacity to send me an announcement that just basically was asking for people to send money to her Venmo for a honeymoon or something like that. Since 2020, we have only seen each other a handful of times despite my parents living 15 minutes from her. Every time I visited, she's avoided me like the plague and has just flat out ignored me when she finally does come to a family function, and I've tried inviting her in a convo or just said anything to her in general. Her husband is pretty cool though. I've chatted with him briefly a couple of times. I have given up on us ever repairing the relationship. My dad says I need to be the bigger person here. However, I feel I've always done that when we fought in the past, and that also I have been trying to do that and have been cordial and kind with her when I do get to see her. Sometimes I get sad and miss how close we used to be, but I also feel like I've tried my best. So, AITAH here?